Oh, g'day, mate. 40 here. So I woke up about 5 a.m. And so I was in my morning meditation about 6:40 when you started to see the sunrise. And the sky was just these ripples of pink. So I was just looking outside, these ripples of pink against a background of palm trees. And I was thinking, like, who would loathe this? Who would hate this kind of beauty? Just didn't make sense to me. So large part of the way that I understand what I believe is by reacting against what other people
And now,
believe.
more.
The journalist and author Joel Stein recalls attending a 2016 election party with a bottle of Trump brand wine in hand. He was expecting to toast Donald Trump's defeat. Didn't work out that way.
I was very, very, legitimately scared. I didn't know if a nuclear war was going to happen. I didn't know if globalization was going to end and we'd have an economic collapse.
This election got Joel Stein thinking. He concludes that President Trump won office by attacking elites. And in a humorous way, at least, Stein set out to defend them. His new book is called In Defense of Elitism, Why I'm Better Than You and You Are Better Than Someone Who Didn't Buy This Book. He argues that we really don't face a battle against the elite, but a battle between differing elites. Donald Trump, the candidate, once said so, noting that his supporters are wealthy in many cases and have bigger boats. So Stein calls it a divide between the boat elite and the intellectual elite.
So one reason that I've struggled when I've just been doing my show on my own is I really need people to bounce off, right? I often only find out what I'm thinking by comparing and contrasting what I'm thinking with someone else. And so I find it interesting to notice what are types of thinking that I have a very strong negative reaction against. And so I have a strong negative reaction against people who instinctively loathe a geographic location, be it Southern California or Japan or Indiana. That just doesn't make sense to me. So people who refer to most of the United States as flyover country, that rubs me the wrong way. To diminish the humanity of people between New York and LA seems weird. I remember when I lived in Northern California, which I did for about 15 years, I'd noticed how much hatred people had in Northern California for Southern California. And the widespread beliefs about how people in Southern California were just almost a completely different species, that the women were sexually promiscuous, that the women all had breast implants. And then I moved to Southern California and found they were very similar to people in Northern California, right? I've lived in Australia, I've lived in England, I've lived in Northern California, Orlando, Florida, and Southern California. And the things that the people in these places have in common are far greater than the things that divide them. So I have an instinctive reaction against destroying the humanity in other people, whether it's based on their race, their religion, or their geography. I have one friend who regards people who dwell in cities as just so much useless cordwood. So just so much useless fuel for a fire. And a really strong reaction against that. I don't believe that people are intrinsically more or less worthy, more or less moral, depending upon where they live, or that they're more or less human, depending upon where they live. That really rubs me the wrong way. When I hear people who say they're Christians and yet they advocate for mass genocide, that rubs me the wrong way. That their Christianity is obviously a mask, or it's a Christianity of their imagination that does not accord with any flesh and blood Christian communities. So how can you say that you're a Christian and then you want to wipe out billions of people in the world? Like that doesn't compute. Or when I hear loathing of people just based on their profession, so whether they're a clerk or a secretary or a farmer or a personal injury lawyer.
Elite.
The boat elite are steeped in honor culture. Dignity is their most valuable non-boat possession. If their girlfriend gets insulted, they fight. If their friend gets in a fight, they fight. If their fighting ability is questioned, they fight. When they get cut off, they honk. Then they yell at the other driver to get out of their car and fight. The intellectual elite don't do this because we know that honking and yelling makes it hard to hear NPR stories.
Stein was reading there from his new book. We spoke with the former Time columnist last week.
This book is a call to arms for the intellectual elite. Not real arms, because we don't believe in those.
Okay.
Those are dangerous. The other people have those arms, so my arms aren't as good as their arms.
It's a metaphorical call to arms.
A metaphorical call to metaphorical arms. Yeah.
Okay.
It's a war we will lose, but it's the best we can do.
Okay, so you're defining yourself as a member of the elite, and we should be more specific, a member of that intellectual elite that President Trump rails against. And did you go to try to meet people on the other side?
I did. I went to the county in America with the highest percentage of Trump voters.
Okay, that's Joel Stein, who wrote a book in defense of elitism, Why I'm Better Than You and Why You're Better Than Somebody Who Didn't Buy This Book. So I think Joel Stein became a regular columnist for Time magazine, at about age 20 or 21. And he often has unusual takes on things, so he's a pretty funny guy. I enjoyed Joel Stein. I met him at a party once with a bunch of New Yorker writers. I think that was about 2005. And so I just went and looked him up on Twitter this morning. It's like, oh, whoa, Joel Stein follows me. Let me follow him back. So sometimes I follow or unfollow people on Twitter, depending on my mood. Sometimes when I retweet someone, then they keep showing up in my Twitter feed. So every time I log onto Twitter, it's my Twitter feed is filled with their posts. Sometimes you can get too much of a good thing. So last night, without much thought, just on instinct, I logged onto Twitter, and there were all these posts from Kevin Michael Grace, who I used to host a show with, and with whom I still have great respect. And it was just too much. So I just wanted to unfollow him for a little while so that my Twitter feed isn't always dominated by his posts. Kevin has a unique perspective on life. He's very well read, a very talented man. He puts on a much better YouTube show, for example, than I can. He's a master performer. But I just needed a break from his particular type of analysis of life. And then suddenly I find that there's all these, Twitter discussions on why I unfollowed Kevin Michael Grace. Wow, Kevin tweeted, I see that Luke Ford has unfollowed me. Oh, dear. And then there are about 20 plus comments in response to that. Kevin says, we were never friends. I understand that. Later, I came to appreciate he didn't like me much. Again, I can understand that. Later still, it appeared that he hated me. Well, break from following someone on Twitter. Sometimes you just want to take a break from having their tweets dominate your Twitter feed. And so you unfollow for a few hours, a few days, a few weeks. And there isn't any greater significance, as in this case, that you just want to take a break. There's nothing that Kevin said that offended me. I saw a comment like, what on earth could one do to offend Luke Ford? And I don't think I've ever encountered a political or religious or cultural or social observation in my life that has offended me. Certainly there's no observation that Kevin has ever made that has offended me. Sometimes one just wants to take a break from a particular type of analysis. And there may not be any greater meaning. So sometimes people may not be as friendly to us as we expect. They may not follow us on Twitter. They may not watch our shows. They may not buy our books. And we could read into it that we let them down some way or that we offended them some way. And it may have nothing to do with that. They just may have other priorities. So we often use hyperbolic terms such as betrayal when other people simply have different priorities than what we have. I have one friend who often reacts to the news by saying, we need to build more ovens. That's not how I react to the news, and more than that, it's not how what I want to see in my Twitter feed. So I'm going to remove myself from that kind of commentary. Maybe I'll say something if I think the person will listen to me, but this is not referring to Kevin, but this is referring to others who have the reaction when there's distressing news. Oh, we need to build more ovens, or any kind of invocation for mass murder or any kind of mass dehumanization of people. And I will want to step back from that. I don't really want to be exposed to that. It's very human to want to dismiss the humanity of people who are different from us. And it's the most basic, natural, and to some degree, it can even be a healthy reaction. But it's not a way of looking at life that I want. Hey, Rodney Martin, long time no talk. How are you, sir?
Good morning, Luke. How's my sound?
You sound great, man. What's going on?
Well, I've been listening to your show. I've been a little sidetracked, as you know, but this business of people taking offense or great umbrage when somebody unfollows them, I think this is just demonstrates how toxic, social media, can be. Why would somebody take offense? Why would the fact that you had unfollowed Kevin Michael Grace create such a discussion on his Twitter feed, and why would he announce it to begin with? I mean, I certainly, it's person's choice who they want to follow, and it's his, Kevin has his Twitter feed. He can put out whatever he wants, but why would he care in the first place? Like, for instance, myself, I don't care who follows me and who doesn't. I don't take personal, I don't consider it a personal attack or a slight if somebody, doesn't like my post or doesn't share it, or, it's just, it just seems that now that this Twitter and social media has become so ingrained in certain person's psyche that they're using it to compensate and replace something that is missing that would be more important.
Yeah, it's like when I had a girlfriend once and she was telling me about problems she was having at work. And after she'd been telling me her story about 10 minutes about how suddenly got quiet and she said, "Why aren't you saying anything?" And I said, "I don't fully understand. I don't relate. I don't get the situation that you're in." She said, "Like, all my friends are telling me how brave I am," because she'd gone to HR to complain about her boss, and I couldn't validate her particular story. And so that was like very distressing to her. So I noticed this often in life, that people will tell me a story about how upset they are, and I won't immediately chime in and go, "Oh yeah, you're so brave," or "You're so strong," or "The other person's a jerk." It just, I may not be inclined to validate their story, and I notice how upsetting that is.
Well, it just appears like in that case, Luke, someone was just looking to be, pardon the language, an attention whore looking for affirmation because they have some issue themselves. For instance, the comment you made about people saying, "Well, let's fire up the ovens." I've heard that too. Uh, Twitter and social media and the internet. Look, we talked about this on your show. It gives people an opportunity to unleash their id and be something that they really aren't. Say things to people that they would never even have the courage unless they were just absolutely drunk and intoxicated to the person's face, and it's just fascinating, the impact. I grew up and went to university, had a life before the advent of social media, and I'm looking at people now, Luke. You can see them. For instance, I think we've talked about this. If you go, when you used to be able to go to a restaurant, with it now, even married couples, first thing they do when they sit down is not, have interact with people, but to whip out their phones and start posting selfies and selfies that are really stupid on social, looking for attention. And I just think this is a broader example of how much we've declined culturally. Culture, I believe, dictates everything, and
Lost you,
on the
Rodney.
internet by
Yeah.
strangers and get upset it's, oh my God, they unfollowed me, they broke up with me. What is their problem? Because it's certainly not me. It's just interesting because I prefer, the internet is a marvelous tool if it's used correctly, but it can also be like alcohol. If you get hooked on it, it can be very toxic and self-destructive to your relationships, to your family, to your jobs, to the fact that people probably wouldn't want to be around you. But it goes to a much broader issue. This battle with the lockdowns, where people have to stay at home. There's one side that says, yeah, let's stay at home and wait out this virus. And there's other people that are, they want to get back to work, get back into normal, even do it as a point of a risk. I understand that. But what I have found, Luke, is a majority of the people that I've encountered and talked to in great length about the stay at home stuff, they're much like these social media people in that they are socially awkward or socially retarded. And when I say retarded, not retarded is just their skills, their social skills, and interact. And they never really interacted with people much anyway. They had most of their interactions were online. So they're pretty happy with staying at home and not having to interact with people because there's some broader issues there and broader issues in our society. I think. I just think. I mean, you don't. I don't know. This doesn't seem to be a prevalent problem within the Jewish community, and because they seem to interact even as insular as they can be sometimes. But it sure seems that this has become a problem in the much broader society, where people are hooked on social media, hooked on having to present a version of themselves that is inauthentic.
Yeah, I'm struck by how much people frequently expect and need you to validate their story, their
Mhm.
particular perspective on things, and that to me just shows a lack of of self awareness or self assuredness. Because I like you, you're a friend, but if you criticized me for, say, being ignorant or being not well read, it wouldn't matter to me because I have no doubts about those things. If you made another type of personal criticism, if it bothered me, it would only because you're amplifying doubts that I have in myself. So I assume that when I encounter people who need me to validate their story about how horrible their ex-wife is, it's because they must have doubts within themselves that they're trying to desperately shore up by getting other people to tell them that their perspective, their story is the only one and true, right and good one.
Well, I think you're onto something there, because I think that's what social media has become. It has become something where people that have some issues, we'll just leave the word at issues, go to mask those issues or to seek. It's almost like, let's take Me Too, Luke, for instance. All of a sudden, you had a rash of women posting on their social media that they had been allegedly sexually assaulted or such years prior. They never gone to the police. They, by all accounts, they hadn't talked. And a lot of accounts, they had not talked to anybody and disclosed this. And when you really peel that onion back of their story, really study it and understand the dynamics of human relationships, particularly between males and females, Luke, what you've seen is, in my opinion, a lot of stories posted to alleviate regret that there really wasn't sexual assaults. It was a fact that, how can I really regret, for instance, let's say actress Z regretted having a intimate encounter with Harvey Weinstein because he was fat and gross and just wasn't a Brad Pitt looking character. So their way of erasing that in their mind for their benefit is to claim a sexual assault on an individual years prior, and to get all of that internet love and internet affirmation. And then they can transform an action, a choice that they made years back that has bothered them, into something entirely new. It's kind of like Alec Baldwin's wife, who we just found out had been masquerading as a Spaniard, and in fact, she is, she's just white. She's just a white upper class female that had a fetish for Spanish. Notice she didn't claim to be Mexican. She claimed to be Spanish. And so I think there's just a lot of parallels that we're seeing in society today.
Now, you have a frequently combative personality. You're a guy who frequently does not back down from a fight. And I would assume that one of the consequences of this pugnacious attitude that you've often displayed towards life is that sometimes people need a Rodney break. Is that fair?
Sure, even in my own family.
Yeah.
And I understand that. I mean, hey, look, and I don't take it personal.
Yeah.
The understand is you have to understand who people are, and also understand. You've met me in person, though, Luke,
Yeah.
and you know that in debate, yes, I'll be combative. If somebody says something stupid, I'll be that. But for the most part, that I'm pretty reasonable. I'm pretty well read.
Yeah.
I just cards that are self-affirmation and to show off and such, to be just not very genuine. And so I just call it out. And by the way, you also know, Luke, is I'm pretty much that way in real life. And that's because I was raised by grandparents whose philosophy, both grandfather and grandmother, by the way, that there are predators and prey in life, and you certainly do not want to be prey. So
Yeah.
you certainly must stand up for yourself and not tolerate fools. It's like the whole debate where the one thing that I really respect Ben Shapiro on is that he refuses to play a part in a person who claims to be a gender other than what the science indicates. I'll leave it that way for the benefit of terms and of the show.
Yeah.
But Ben Shapiro's response is, I'm not going to validate your costume. I'm not going to. You may parade and do whatever and say whatever you want, but don't demand that I accept it or I agree with it. And of course, he always caps that off as facts don't care about your feelings, which is a pretty good line. But I kind of take that approach as people are free, because I do like the concept of freedom. If they want to dress up like whatever and identify as something, then fine. I'm free to respond in jest and say that I identify as an Apache attack helicopter. But that's just the way it is. And yeah, people will take a break, and I understand that. And it doesn't bother me. I don't take it personally. Now, I have gone back several times where I think that I may have pushed the envelope, and I've made amends and apologized. And I think that's something everybody should do.
Yeah. One thing that I've become irritated with of late in particular and pushing back against is geographic chauvinism. I'm just realizing how widespread is the notion that if people live in a certain place, then they're not really human. So if people live in Southern California, they're just soulless drones. Or if people live in California, period, they're not really human. Or if people live in New York, then they're all jerks. Or if people live in Australia, then they're all uncultured. I've really gotten tired of geographic chauvinism. You're somebody who's lived in different places. You're aware of how there is this human tendency to just completely dismiss the humanity of those who live in a different geographic region. Do you have any thoughts on geographic chauvinism?
Well, yeah, I find it to be intellectually dishonest because, as you know, I've lived in Southern California. I spend a lot of time in Los Angeles, as I have recently, and will continue to. And then, of course, if I want to, my getaway, then I actually have my small place up in just east of Lake Tahoe. Different. I mean, the fact of the matter is, just because there are different, LA being the cosmopolitan, city, as opposed to, say, Lake Tahoe, where it's predominantly rural and people. But you see, that works both ways. And of course, home base for me is Scottsdale, Arizona, which is kind of a hodgepodge of everything. I mean, you can have it has all of the, shall we say, snobbish shopping centers that LA has. while at the same time, you can always go down and see those very same people shopping in the Walmart, which I actually have a problem with. But the geographic chauvinism is something I've always found to be dishonest because, most of the people that engage in it have not traveled very much, Luke. Most of the people that would say everybody in New York are jerks, they probably haven't been there. I would say if you were to ask the person that made such a blanket statement, well, have you been to New York? New York City is what we're talking about, Luke, obviously, because upstate New York is vastly different than New York City. So they usually tag that as New York City. If they've ever been there, most of them will say no. Just like a lot of people that will, rag on Los Angeles. And of course, Los Angeles City, I loved. I spent a great deal of time in my youth there. I still go there for certain things. And of course, now people are ragging on it because of how poorly ran it was, which has resulted in, mass homeless camps on sidewalks. Luke, I even saw some Beverly Hills a couple days ago, which is kind of odd. And I actually seen more homeless camps in Beverly Hills than I've seen in Santa Monica, which kind of speaks to enforcement and policy of respective cities. But the geographic chauvinism is something that I've always chalked up to people that are, one, not very well read, two, have not traveled very much, three, really don't attempt to have any social engagement with a broad array of people, and lastly, it's a pretty low IQ statement. And I think I'll cap it off with that last comment.
Yeah, another thing I don't get is this idea that because people live in the cities that they are inherently morally inferior or less human or less valuable as human beings. I don't think there's anything morally superior by living in a city or living in a suburb or living in the country. What are your thoughts?
Well, I would agree. And like I said, you're talking about the breaks, somebody might need a Rodney break or whatever. There's times when I actually need an LA or a California break, or when I finally go up and, hide out in northern Nevada. And that's kind of a serenity place there on the lake. And then after a while, you kind of want to go back to the amenities. And the fact of the matter is, I can understand why somebody would live full time in LA or the larger cities. I can get that. There's just people that want that cosmopolitan life. They like the culture. They like, of course, all of this has been shut down because of the pandemic. But I can understand that. And then equally, I can understand people that say, no, I want to live. I mean, I have my, one of my favorite cousins who I love to death has lived in the rural areas almost her entire life, loves it. She thrives, has raised a beautiful family. And so I get it. It's just people have different dynamics in what they are. Bernard says he thought I left California. I still own a home in California, Bernard. But I spend most of my time between Scottsdale, Arizona, and east of Lake Tahoe. I still go, obviously, visit my children in California there, and I go to LA quite a bit for a couple of issues.
Now, one thing I do like about Southern California and LA is that I almost never notice any reflexive geographic chauvinism. Like, I don't hear people in LA reflexively hating on San Francisco or New York, while when I'm in San Francisco or New York, I notice it's very common for people there to hate LA. So have you noticed among Los Angelinos a reflexive, hatred for people in different cities and different locations?
I will tell you where I've seen that most often, Luke, is in San Francisco, because San Francisco it just has a whole different, and I'm not going to get into any sort of perceived personal, but I know there is a great, shall we say, rivalry, and there's a great, well, let's just say San Francisco has an issue, with LA, because for years in the early part of the history of the state, San Francisco was the mecca of the state. For years, they dominated state politics, and then LA grew so fast after 1945. It just grew exponentially, and LA now dominates the politics of the state. Let's understand. I mean, and for the most part, if you look at California elections, If you carry San Francisco, LA, and and place very well in the San Diego area, which used to be pretty Republican, but it's now going the other way. It didn't matter what the whole rest of 85% of the state voted. If you look at the map between on California between blue and red, a vast majority of California is red. There's only three and a half spots where there's where it's blue, but that's the population areas. And of course, LA edged out. So I do, when I used to travel to San Francisco, I would hear, people, lawyers, judges, people that are PhDs, just engaging in this type of chauvinism versus Los Angeles. And I always thought it was interesting because they're both been gone to be pretty much liberal cities, but it had to do with the power dynamic, because if Los Angeles literally has veto power over anything that the rest of the state wants to do.
Yeah.
Now, in the rural areas of California, Luke, where I travel quite a bit, it's quite the opposite. Even conservative people, they would say, I wouldn't want to live in Los Angeles, but I certainly like going there. I've heard that.
Yeah. And I noticed with Philadelphia too, it's one of the nastiest cities to play in. The fans there just have such hatred for opposing teams. It seems like Philadelphia has a similar chip on their shoulder vis-a-vis New York and Washington, D.C., to what San Francisco has to L.A., that somehow these bigger or more powerful cities, they attract just tremendous animus from a neighboring city like a San Francisco or a Philadelphia.
It's geographic tribalism, I guess we could call it, Luke. It's kind of interesting. Now, because I've traveled my whole life and lived in a lot of different places, I just find that to be low IQ when people do that. Because most of my friends, because I'm not in one place, sitting maybe when things change personally, but most of my friends live all throughout the country, even throughout the world. And I've traveled, been to these places, so I just know a lot of these fairy tales, we'll call them, just are not accurate. I mean, do certain things bug me about LA? Yeah, the homeless camps bug me about LA. The cost bugs me about LA. The parking issues bug me about LA because I just like to roar in my car and park wherever I want. But these are all just minor issues. But I've never been one for the the geographic tribalism, because I've lived all over, and I have found that there to be a very kind, caring, moral people everywhere. They're just looking for different dynamics as to where they live. And a lot of people, Luke, they end up living where they live for two reasons, I think, and see what your thoughts are. Either that's where they grew up, they in that area, and that's where they're comfortable with, and there's those people that just don't travel or live beyond 50 to 60 miles of where they were born. They're comfortable, they do very well, God bless them. And then there's people that have to move because of employment or professional dynamics, and they tend to, that's a different dynamic altogether.
Yeah, those seem to be the two basic reasons. Also, so professionally for education, and sometimes to accommodate a spouse, particularly if you're having children, it gives you more incentives to be near other family members who can help you take care of your kids.
Yeah, that's true. The spouse dynamic I would say is a third. There are, significantly, and I don't know what the breakdown move to an area closer to the wife's family, as opposed to the wife moving someplace with the husband. Normally, they would move because of job considerations. I mean, that has certainly been my dynamic, throughout the years.
So we both like nationalism. We both like how it helps people cohere. It creates in-group identity, and we also understand that with in-group identity comes accompanying negative feelings about out-groups. It's just that I've grown tired of I understand it's the natural human tendency, but particularly in distant right nationalist circles, just to completely dismiss the humanity of out-groups. So whether it's on the basis of race or religion or geography, I've just grown tired of it. I accept that it's fairly natural to the human condition. I would just hope that more intelligent people can transcend the inherent human tendency to dismiss the humanity of those who are not in your group?
Well, Luke, that's not happening only on the dissident right, or let's say the right. The left has done an amazing, I think, has probably been as bad, if not worse, with regard to friction between groups. Tribalism, let's call it tribalism. I think the left has been far more toxic and it caused far more damage. And it's concerned me because I'm still seeing, and whether you, I don't know if you agree or not, but I still see a lot of dynamics taking place now within the United States with regard to ethnic division, ethnic strife, tribalism that afflicted the Soviet Union the 5 years before it broke up. People always like to say that Ronald Reagan and he just outspent and broke up the Soviet Union. The fact of the matter is the Soviet Union broke up from within. They had tremendous tribalism and ethnic strife throughout the Soviet Union for the 5 to 6 years prior to its breakup. And I'm talking about prior to Gorbachev's reign, because Gorbachev, I think, was the beginning of the breakup. He was just a tool. But I think the left, the right has always been dismissed. The right would go out there and it would usually be what's commonly called now as Wignat, screaming about this, that, and the other thing with regard to how inferior and subhuman other people are, and completely, as you say, dismissing the humanity of entire groups. But they didn't have any power, Luke. The right has never had enough power to affect change along ethnic or racial rationale. The left has. They have power in the media. They have power in the elected governments. And they have engaged in what I would call toxic identity politics, to where they are now, running. There was recently there's a court case. I can't remember the state, where the governor just set up a relief fund only for Black people. No brown, no Asian, no white may apply. It's been placed on. It's been litigated, and when you take a country like the United States, that has been a home to large swaths of people from different ethnic groups. It has been from its creation, for the whether people want to accept it or not, a multi-ethnic cooperative or confederation. And it's what that's happened is for the first 220 or 200 plus years, it was the Caucasian people that dominated the policy because of the majority population. And of course, now we're seeing an increase in demographics from the non-Caucasian elements of the United States. They're demanding more resources, and you have the left amplifying that and corrupting it by wanting to base everything policy-wise on race and ethnicity. And that's inherently dangerous in a country like the United States. It's almost like the same thing that happened in Yugoslavia, the USSR, Czechoslovakia. There was a majority, there was Czechs and Slovaks. They finally broke up because of these types of demands that policy be made based on ethnic rationale only. And nobody was a Czechoslovakian when you went to Czechoslovakia, Luke. I visited there. They were either a Czech or they were a Slovak. I mean, that was it. And now we're seeing this in the United States. Look, I see more and more posts on social media. I see more, where they are degrading the left is degrading the humanity, Luke, of people that look like us simply because what we look like. This collective guilt, all of these perceived grievances, and it's inherently dangerous. So I think the left, the right has always done it, and they've not been, effective because they really have been marginalized. And the right the left is doing it, and they are having an impact, a very negative impact on society because they have power.
So I've just been reading this book, The Intellectuals and the Masses, Pride and Prejudice Among the Literary Intelligentsia, 1880 to 1939. And it argues that modernist literature and modernist art are essentially a hostile reaction to the large reading public created by late 19th century education reform. So as the general public in first world nations becomes literate towards the end of the 19th century, the intellectuals then wanted to distinguish themselves from the great mass of humanity by making their literature, their poetry, their art increasingly inaccessible to the average person, to remove their art from the concerns of average people, concerns about love, connection, fears for their children, these very human concerns, and to make their art and their novels much more abstract and essentially inaccessible. And I thought that was a fascinating way to summarize this whole literary and artistic modernist movement, that intellectuals essentially wanted to take their ball and go play on their own, and to wall themselves off from the great mass of humanity. And I thought that was very accurate. Any thoughts?
Well, my opinion is intellectuals have always done that. Luke, they've always walled themselves off. Let's remember, let's go back to 1912 and the sinking of the Titanic. If you look at who had access to the lifeboats, and those lifeboats were only half filled, and the class of people. I mean, you had first class, second class, and you had third, which was steerage, which was basically the undesirables of society. Let's understand that I think the elites have always been that way. It was easily back in those days to be more open about it, whereas today the elites are very concerned about how they're perceived in the overall public. So they have to be a little more creative as to how they wall themselves off and, shall we say, disassociate from those that they believe are beneath them. So, I mean, this is nothing new in America. It's nothing new in Europe. It's nothing new in Asia. It's nothing new in the third world, versus the first world. So, I just think it's something that it's a fascinating dynamic to look at, because it's always the elites that cave into, let's say, the mob violence that erupted, this summer. It was the elites that caved into the mob, and it was the average working class people that resisted. And I found that to be interesting as well. I mean, it was the elites. I mean, I shared a tweet with you. I hope I didn't cause you to need a Rodney break over it. But I remember I responded to you were talking about you needed more content on one of the streaming services, and my response was, well, look at what happens when you open up your what is it, Uber Eats or Grubhub, and the first thing they have on there is Black-owned businesses. That's the first. You have to really navigate hard just to go out and find a restaurant that you like, regardless of who owns it. And I said, well, I need more of that in my app when I try to order food to avoid nasty hospital food. And but it's just it's an interesting dynamic. I just think that the elites, for all the power that they have or they perceive that they are usually the first to fold.
Now, how much effort have you put into trying to appreciate abstract art and literature that our social betters have told us this is the best art? So talking about, say, the writings of a Virginia Woolf or a James Joyce or a T.S. Eliot or atonal music or this art that is completely abstract. Have you spent much effort?
Believe it or not, I've enjoyed Joyce and Eliot. Wolf, I just can't stomach. It's very difficult to deal with that. Now, in art takes a lot of different forms. I do not like the modernist abstract paintings. I don't. And now one of my daughters is an art student, and she is very talented. And when I seen this developing in her and where she was going, I thought that would be where she'd go. But it turns out she finds it equally repulsive, and that's without any influence from me. I think that might come from her mother, but the majority of the art that she does is more traditional, so it's just I don't disappreciate it. I think there's some things that are put on display that are called art that are just is nothing but trash. I mean, I can remember the controversy over Mapplethorpe and what he was calling as art, which was publicly funded. I'm not convinced we need to publicly fund art. I don't think Rembrandt received public funds at all. But it's a testament to how we have, you can either say evolved or devolved, that art now represents, I think, for a large part, the modern art represents, much like we talked about in social media, people are trying to just get attention and compensate for something that they're missing. They're just not satisfied with themselves.
How strong is the case in your mind for massive voter fraud deciding the 2020 presidential election?
It would depend on what you call massive voter fraud. I think that there was significant system failure. I shared on your show what happened to me. I went to vote and was told that my ID had already been used to obtain a paper ballot in a city that I have never lived in. And that had never happened before, never. So I was greatly concerned that a guy named Moreno had voted under my voter ID, it's linked to your state ID, had voted via absentee in a city that I had never lived in. So I think there was broad system failure. I think certain states violated their own constitution, and in so doing so violated the federal and just making a new election law outside of the legislature. Pennsylvania is an example. And then two, I think that there has been. I think there has been affidavits. There has been demonstrated that dead people's ballots dead people had received ballots, and dead people had casted ballots. We had family members that disclosed that their grandmother had received a ballot and she'd been dead 5 years. And so I think there is significant evidence of that. Now, here's a big question. Was there, when you talk about voter fraud, people tend to just limit that to saying, well, obviously a dead person voted or an illegal alien voted. Voter fraud can also mean systematic fraud that enabled ineligible voters to vote, or votes to be counted that should not have been counted, i.e. saying, we're going to accept ballots a week to 10 days after election day. That is a problem in my mind. Now, couple all that together, here is the question. Was there enough of these systematic failures and just straight out voter fraud, fraudulent people voting, dead people, to affect the outcome of the election? I have to tell you, Luke, before, a month or two ago, I was firmly on the side that there was. I'm rethinking this. It doesn't mean that I like or am endorsing Joe Biden, as you know, but the jury's out for me that if there was enough of this to have turned the election, because you have to look at 2016 to begin with. Donald Trump only was elected for two reasons. One, 5 million blacks stayed home in 2016. They just couldn't stand Hillary Clinton. And two, Trump only won by a combined total of 70,000 votes total in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Had there been 3% of blacks that had not turned out, the remaining 2% of the five had gone out and voted, I think the 2016 election might have gone the other way. So Trump did not win by huge margins in 2016 to begin with. And I'm just being honest and fair here. I don't like the fact that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, particularly Kamala Harris, is going to be a heartbeat away from the presidency. I find Biden's cabinet to be absolutely repulsive in terms of policy and what they're planning to do. But you have to look at the totality. It's like when we used to talk about talking history, Luke. A lot of people tend to try to talk history through their political lenses as opposed to just the facts on what, of course, the great debate on that was always over World War II. But getting back to this, I don't know. I'm not convinced one way or the other. However, and the fact that the state legislatures of 3 of these states are GOP, and they have the power to intervene had they seen a significant amount of voter fraud that would have changed the results of the election in their respective states, did not step in as Florida did in 2000. Remember, the Florida legislature stepped in 2000 and began the process of naming the electors. None of that happened as I anticipated that it would this time. And so now we're left with 11 to 13 Republican senators and 130 Republican House members challenging the individual electors. And what their objective is, Luke, is to have a commission, as was the case in 1876, when a man named Samuel Tilden from New York won the election, both in terms of popular vote and electoral votes, against the Republican Rutherford B. Hayes. Rutherford B. Hayes, was the Republican nominee. He lost decisively, and yet the electors from, I believe, 3 states were challenged. It resulted in an electoral commission and some wheeling and dealing, which put Rutherford B. Hayes in the White House. That might still happen. I don't know. And obviously, Luke, there is a significant number of Republican officials, senators, including Ted Cruz, which surprises me, that have seen enough that makes them think that these electors are not legitimate based on what took place in the election. Now, if I were to challenge electors, Luke, I would challenge it more on the systemic issues, the fact that they allowed votes to be counted that should not have been counted, regardless if they were legal voters. The fact is, I don't see how you justify sending mail-in ballots just in mass mail to everybody on a voter list when even the secretaries of state will admit that their voter list is inaccurate, that they have not taken dead people off and such, and then arbitrarily changing the rules to allow people to vote literally after the election. I think it was Pennsylvania that allowed it up to, I think, 7 or 8 days, 7 days, one of those. You could literally have voted after the election and had your vote count. So I would challenge on those issues. I think that is a real issue that should be addressed. I don't think we should be sending out mass ballots to people that have not requested them, particularly and just based on the voter rolls, which we know are inherently inaccurate. And I don't believe in changing arbitrarily and capriciously election rules to allow people to literally vote after the election. To me, 2 days would be fair. As long as your ballot is postmarked and it's received within 2 days, it could be counted. But that's just not what happened.
Okay, so a lot of people on the right have dismissed COVID-19 as a hoax. The news media tells us that each day more people are dying from COVID-19 than died on 9/11 or that died in the Pearl Harbor attack. So if approximately 5,000 plus Americans are dying each day, as the news media tells us, that seems to indicate to me that this is a pretty big deal. We've got new figures out from the Centers for Disease Control stating that the true U.S. coronavirus death toll is approaching 500,000. What's your thought? Is COVID a hoax? Is COVID just another respiratory illness? Or is it an unprecedented in I don't know, 40 years, 50 years, 100 years virus? What do you think?
Well, Luke, you missed a big one. What we've also heard is COVID has killed more Americans than that died in the Vietnam War over its 1966 to 1975, 10-year run. We've heard that one. Now, I do not believe COVID-19 is a hoax. My brother had it. It almost killed him. My nephew has it right now. The only reason why I have not gotten it is I have followed, reasonably, the guidelines. I have not had a problem wearing a mask. I've not had a problem using hand sanitizer. I've also stayed home as much as possible for a whole lot of reasons. I had my stuff delivered, to me. So I've been fortunate in that with what I would consider, just the more reasonable preventive steps, I haven't gotten it. But like I said, my nephew and my brother have had it. and it is serious. It will kill you. It will kill you, especially if you have underlying conditions. It will just the way that it attacks the respiratory system, and now we maybe perhaps other systems. So that's that. We've also seen a lot of people, Luke, particularly on the right, who had screamed of it being a hoax and were ignoring all of the safety precautions, end up getting it, and on their deathbed, crying regret. And so that has happened. I think it is completely stupid to ignore something, a very serious contagion like COVID-19 that is, obviously it's real, to ignore it and dismiss it and put yourself at risk, but in so doing so, putting yourself at risk, putting your loved ones at risk too. So, I mean, it's not that unreasonable. At the same time, I have a lot of sympathy. I think some of these lockdowns and some of these policies put forth by the states have been absolutely, ridiculous, unfair, and grossly prejudicial. I don't think that there's shutting down outdoor dining in LA. That's going to finish off a lot of businesses that were barely getting by to begin with. So I understand that and agree with that. At some point, the problem with America, Luke, you can look through history. COVID is another example. Is in the United States, we tend to go knee jerk when something happens. 9/11 is an example. We tend to, and then COVID, you have two extremes. There's never any attempt to do anything moderately in the United States. We always act emotionally first. Oh my God, we have to lock down the entire economy. If everybody stay at home, and if they violate that, we're going to fine and arrest them, instead of looking to some sort of reasonable measure that would have preserved the economy and at the same time protecting public health. We hear all the time, Luke, the United States has the greatest healthcare system in the world. Okay, let's stipulate to that for purposes of the discussion. Then why could we have not managed this virus far more effective without destroying the economy, and as a result seeing thousands and thousands and thousands of businesses? I mean, in New York and San Francisco, there were restaurants that had been in business 100+ years that went out of business because of the policy as a result of this. So no, I don't dismiss it at all, but I think there should be some reasonable moderation in how we react to it. That's my take on it. I think if you it's like your house is on fire and denying that it's on fire, and I'm not going to call the fire department, and you end up being burned to a cinder. Yeah, it's an issue. It will kill you, especially if you have underlying conditions, such as the case of my brother. Not so. My nephew is doing quite well. He's a young guy, very strong, and he's attributing it to a bad flu. That's what he's told me on the phone, that it's like having the bad flu. And I think he's 6 days into his 14-day incubate or whatever period. So it is what it is. Luke, I think that it's something that people are going to have to reasonably respond to. At the same time, understand that if you ignore it and play with fire, you can get burned.
So I didn't realize that we essentially had the formula for the vaccine by, I believe, January 13th, that China released the DNA of the virus something like January 11th, when Moderna scientists spent a weekend, came up with the vaccine formula by January 13th. By February 24, apparently we had plenty of evidence that this vaccine would work. And also we had all sorts of reason to believe that the downsides of taking the vaccine were pretty minimal. But because the FDA does not allow challenge trials, going through the whole bureaucratic procedure required by the FDA and other similar agencies around the world, means that we didn't get the vaccine released until December, which I didn't realize until I just read an article on this about 3 weeks ago. So that's the first time that I got angry about our public health response, to understand that we had very good reason to believe in February that we had a vaccine that worked for this, and it was only bureaucratic procedures that prevented people volunteering to try the vaccine and then allowing people the choice, say, in March, whether or not they wanted to take the vaccine. it seems to me that we could have completely skipped the lockdowns and all the attendant misery if we'd simply allowed people both the freedom to take the vaccine as an experiment and then to use their own judgment whether or not to take the vaccine in March, April, widespread rollout. We would not have needed to lock down this country. Any thoughts?
Well, I agree with you. I mean, there's an perfect example. As I said earlier in my comments, we have supposedly the best healthcare system, and I'll include in that R&D, research, things of that nature, on the globe. And yet, the Russians rolled out their vaccine how many months ago?
At least 6 months ago, yeah.
6 months ago, and it seems to have had a positive effect in Russia, but yet it was poo-pooed by what we've talked about earlier, the elites and the intellectuals. Well, we don't know about. Well, guess what? They rolled it out, and they have seen a positive response. They've seen a downturn in case. At least that's what I've read. But in the United States, and not only just the United States, if you look to Western Europe, Britain, all that, they didn't. You have to think that Moderna, an international tech company, that could have been enrolled. Isn't it funny that not just the United States, but the West in general seems to be hung up on bureaucratic procedure and bureaucracy and the proverbial quote unquote red tape, even to the detriment of its citizens. And you have to ask why, because if the virus is as deadly as it is, and there's no reason to believe that it's not, wouldn't you want to just try to at least throw a Hail Mary like the Russians did?
Yeah, particularly when there's virtually no downside to taking the vaccine, and there is a tremendous downside for letting the virus run wild. We've got approximately 500,000 unnecessary deaths in the United States in 2020 due to COVID, and we could have avoided that if we'd simply given people the option to take the vaccine back in March and April. And the reason that people didn't get that option is because bureaucrats want to cover their ass. So they only get blamed if there's like a freak death from the vaccine, but they don't get any blame if there are hundreds of thousands of deaths from the virus.
No disagreement, but I wonder how much of it is covering their ass, Luke, in terms of wanting to avoid liability, as possibly other reasons, financial reasons. I'm just wondering, how much of that played into this, because where there is large bureaucracy, Luke, there is always corruption. And I have to ask, I wonder why. I just wonder how much of that played in to the fact that we didn't get a vaccine until December. The Russians got it in, what was it? What did you say, June?
Yeah,
July?
June, July.
Yeah, they got it in June and July, and it seems to have had been working. And of course, we don't have all the information out of Russia. They're not a truly open society. But what you do see, particularly from people, even skeptics of the Russian government, was that this was something they did right. And here in the West, whether it's France, Germany, Britain, I mean, I would have expected more out of the today's Germany in terms of expediting a vaccine. But even they didn't do that. And right now, I think there are still countries in Europe, in the West, Luke, that are just now approving this vaccine that came out of Moderna, which was ready months and months and months ago. So it's not just the United States, Luke. It's the West in general that has this fetish for bureaucracy and procedure and policies at the expense of its citizens. Where if you look at other countries that have rolled it out, they seem to have a different, shall we say, cultural concept of what's good for the citizenry.
So I've noticed a lot of people on the right saying that they're going to turn their back on politics now that Trump lost the election. And it seems that, to me, their political apathy is a result of an inability to know how to process fear and to process anger. And so they go from one extreme. One extreme in 2016 was that we got Trump elected, we're heroic, we can change history. And now when Trump loses, it's like, okay, I'm done with politics, I'm washing my hands, I'm walking away. Any thoughts on these two, which seem to be dramatic overreactions?
Isn't that what we see, though, consistently, particularly on the far dissident right? people will come in and get excited about something, whatever the shiny thing is. And usually it's been a poobah. Usually it's been a Richard Spencer or a Nick Fuentes, or they'll get excited about that, their poobah. And then when it doesn't work out, there's three things that usually happens, particularly on the dissident right, is they get exposed to the political pushback. They'll get doxxed, or I just read that the guy that took over that Northwest Front thing after Harold Covington died, he shut the whole thing down because people found out he was working at Amazon, and they got him fired. And he used to be the most brashest guy online behind a pseudonym, talking about how he was committed to the cause and blah blah blah. But three things usually happen with the dissident right, Luke, is they actually get significant political pushback, and that's what politics is. Politics is a brutal blood sport, and you have to have significant thick skin to play in it at certain levels. Okay. And so they will get the real pushback and understand what politics is really like. And so then they'll quit. They'll erase all their social media posts. They'll pull down and they'll walk away. They'll quit because of that. Or two, they're offered a good job. They get an opportunity to improve themselves personally, and then they walk away because they see dissident right politics as a liability to an $80,000 a year job and a potential woman that they want to make a wife, and such. So there's that element. And then, of course, what we're seeing now is that their idol loses, or shall we say, their hero worship is dampened by either the idol, their hero loses, or some personal thing like Matt Heimbach comes to light, and so they melt away. And this is where the right has a significant problem versus the left. The left is committed to ideas. They could care less who the leader is at any given time, or the spokesman. They are committed to advancing those ideas. The right has always been driven, and we've seen that in the dissident right up to traditional conservative Republicans who still idolize Ronald Reagan. They've always been narrowly focused and committed, say, to personality. And let me tell you something: the left wins and advances their agenda, even in the face of electoral losses, because they are committed to ideas. The left has, they lost for a significant number of years, particularly this extreme left. But pretty soon, they kept it up. They kept committed to their ideas. They kept influencing, using the media, using social media. And pretty soon you see their ideas going, quote unquote, mainstream and discussed on the floors of Congress. There's a big difference. And, that's been my big criticism of the right and the dissident right, is they're not committed to an ideology and ideas. They're more personality based. And as long as they're personality based, they're not going to advance their overall agenda.
There's one thing that I see that Trump and Richard Spencer have in common is that they both played to their base without regard to how much what they were saying and doing would fire up their opposition. So there was a massive turnout increase in 2018 because Trump really fired up his opposition in addition to firing up his base. And also Richard Spencer was almost broken by the opposition that he generated from Hailgate onward. So I think this is something that many people have a problem with, whether in politics or not, that they don't take into account the consequences of their behavior on other people and how other people are then going to respond to them. So Trump playing to his base, there's benefits to that, but overall it's going to be a net negative if you fire up your opposition more than you're able to inspire and expand your base. Any thoughts?
Well, I don't know who Richard Spencer's base is anymore. I mean, given his public pronouncements, but I do find it interesting, and by that both, as we say, Spencer and Trump, they handle losses in much the same way. Spencer is still wanting to reclaim Charlottesville, and but anyway, but Trump, yeah, it's an interesting dynamic because he did play, kept his base fired up, thinking that would be how he would be reelected. And what both these types of let's just take Richard Spencer and Trump out of it. Let's look at their personalities. They often don't understand, yes, Luke, that what their actions and statements have on other people, but they also don't have an appreciation of other people in general. For instance, Trump, for instance, he knew he wasn't going to get the left, but he could have done more to go after that middle group. It's always, well, let me think about who I'm going to vote for now. The fact that Trump really didn't go after, shall we say, the fence sitters or the people in the center, speaks to that, to his folly. He didn't seek to expand his base, actually. Now, the Republicans will say, "Oh, yes, he did. He got more blacks than other presidents. It was still, I think it was in the single digits. He got a few more Hispanics, so he expanded his base." Well, he suffered, Luke, in 2020 with a significant drop in white male vote, which is kind of interesting. People were talking about the gender gap with females, but Trump lost votes among his core constituency from 2016. He experienced a drop in white male vote. So did he expand his base? I don't think so. Did he play to his base effectively? Something went wrong because a significant number of his traditional base didn't support him, if these numbers are indeed accurate. And so it's there it is. There's in the chat box, Trump lost 5% of the male vote. That is significant. That is losing 5% of the male vote is significant, given that he only won by 70,000 votes over 3 states of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and I want to be clear on that number. That's a projection. It's based on polling.
Correct.
We'll know more later, and it's just the white male vote. So I've kept hearing that essentially from Election Day, that Trump lost 5% of the white male vote. I'm skeptical that it's that much. I'm curious to see what more definitive results will be. Now, let's say that this is the end of the Trump era. In retrospect, it seems to me Trump was not particularly good at governing, that he had many great instincts, but he was not particularly interested in governing, not particularly effective at governing. He certainly wasn't able to be the great negotiator as he presented himself in the 2016 campaign.
Well, Luke, this was my criticism on your shows. Remember, I talked about all of those vacant positions that he could have filled with his people, which would steer policy even greater than his executive orders and some of his other points. The fact that he just, not only was he piss poor at governing, he didn't seek to improve, nor did he have the wherewithal to give people that worked for him a chance to do anything. So he wasn't able. He talked about in the 2016 campaign that he was going to attract the best and the brightest and such, and yet he couldn't even fill all of these his cabinet had the greatest turnover in history of any presidential administration in 4 years. He went through 2 or 3 secretaries of state. He went through 3 defense secretaries, and it goes on and goes on. Only Ben Carson and Betsy DeVos stayed with him the entire 4 years, if I remember correctly. Those are the only 2 that stayed with him the entire 4 years. So I'm just, we talked about this on your show. He wasn't good at it, and he wasn't willing to put people in that would compensate from where his weaknesses were. It's almost as if he tried to run the federal government, Luke, the way he ran the Trump organization, which was on the cheap. If you look at how Trump has run his business, it was on the cheap. I remember a few years back, when he first started talking about running, looking on the organization website, and he had all of his properties, very well done, very beautiful properties. And then he had all of the personal, like if you wanted to show, his clothing line. And if you clicked on that, it clicked over to Amazon, which I'm wondering if there was a fight over his business relationship with Amazon, is why he's had such a negative reaction to Jeff Bezos, and really after Bezos. But I don't know, a supposition. But yeah, the fact that he was not good at governing, nor did he care to improve, nor did he appoint people and then let them do their jobs and follow a set policy. And of course, part of that was his problem, because I used to call John Kerry and Mitt Romney the great flip-floppers, but Trump was not consistent in a lot of things either. So it's I think he ends his administration, this one, with some significant things to be proud of. The fact that not only did he bring the immigration debate front and center, made it an issue, won with it, and actually started addressing it, and listen to a
Okay, suddenly lost
the
you.
people have been concerned. He addressed that.
Right. So I can't think of any other politician for whom he's been so damaging to people's careers. Like, how many people have had their lives and careers enhanced by going to work or going to battle for Donald Trump? It seems like the overwhelming majority have been affected. They've been affected adversely. It doesn't seem like Trump has much loyalty to those who work for him, yet he expects 100% loyalty from them.
Well, he doesn't reciprocate. We talked about that. But then also damaging on the careers. I think that's a reflection of how toxic and tribal our politics and society have become. You hear Joe Biden calling for unity, but that's just what he's asking for is not unity. He's asking for surrender. He's asking for people to just suck it up because he's finally got to go into the Oval Office after 3 failures. And then, but you also see out on the social media and even on the nightly news, Democrats and people on the left saying they have no intentions of unifying. They'll never talk to a Trump supporter. Families have been divided over this, which is kind of just bizarre. It's just bizarre. It goes to show just how polarized and tribal our society has become because the elites, which is a topic of this show, the elites, which include the politicians and the politicians that the elites anoint and promote, have just not listened to the populace. There's this huge division between the government and the system and the populace, and it's not healthy.
So you've had more than your share of challenges the last couple of years. How have you dealt with the fear and anxiety that comes up?
Fear is something. I mean, everybody gets afraid of certain things, but I maybe that goes to that personality issue that you talked about, Luke. You said that sometimes maybe somebody needs a Rodney break. Is I tend to address things head on. Someone tells me, that hey, the economy is crashing. Well, I've always been a meticulous planner and been tried to anticipate and prepare for quote unquote rainy days. You have to address issues. It goes back to that thing that my grandparents taught me. You're either a prey or you're a predator, and I chose to be a predator and protect myself, protect my family, and be prepared rather than be a victim. That was one of the issues I had with the dissident right. Is they approached everything from victimhood, much like BLM. To me, there was no difference between a lot of the people on the dissident right and BLM. They were both claiming victimhood. I just refused to be a victim, Luke. That's how I approach it.
Now, how have you used your spare time since the election? How have you parceled up, say, with regard to social media, with regard to mainstream news sources, with regard to, say, dissident right opinion sources, or with books? How have you divided your time?
Well, believe it or not, the election wasn't something that, I voted. I had that incident at the polls where I was told that I'd already voted. I had to deal with that. That actually angered me. The fact that, there I actually saw a legitimate case of voting irregularity, and I was an exhibit. That bothered me. But in terms of the overall election, I mean, I've studied more of the historical trends because this election has been contested from the very night that they called off, from election night when they stopped counting and shut down, which created this whole problem, Luke. When they shut down that night, what was it, about 2 in the morning, 1 in the morning, and they shut down, I mean, that was the most foolish and stupid thing anybody could have done because it fueled the suspicion that somebody was fixing something. Like Lyndon Johnson, the famous ballot box 54, where that's how Johnson first got into the Senate, was he sent John Connally and a couple of friends over, the Bakers, Bobby Baker, and they stuffed ballot box 54. I believe it was ballot box 54. There's a famous picture that came out years later of Conley and Baker with the ballot box on the hood of their car after they'd stuffed it, and then went and delivered it to the ballot counters. The county ballot counters at that time had a different system back then. So how I've divided my time is I've studied the historical trends, what happens. I've taken it more as a lab project than anything else, because what's going to happen is going to happen. And quite honestly, Luke, you have to ask yourself, how has Trump the fact that Trump got into office, he addressed a few things, but my life fundamentally didn't change significantly as a result of who's been president of the United States. Because obviously I vote for president and for people for shared policies. But overall, my life didn't change significantly, from Bush to Obama and from Obama to Trump. And if this election is successfully challenged and Trump stays in, so be it. If Biden gets in, I'm not going to like the direction of the country. But again, that also, I have the benefit of going different places, to mentally get away rather than belly aching and complaining. So I do read a lot of news. I read a lot of foreign news, and some, people just have to decide, do they want to get spoon fed and live in a bubble and isolation and then be let down, or do they want to kind of read a diverse and educate themselves and understand that, what was that terminology used where a person always stays within their own circle and feeds off their own circle?
Groupthink.
Yeah. I mean, to me, that's the group. They just said it right. The people that are quitting, saying, "Oh, I'm quitting politics." I think Cernovich announced that, Luke. I believe that's what I heard. Is because they have isolated themselves within their own little groupthink, and then they became tremendously disappointed. And of course, some of this, I used to be a boxer years ago, so I always knew going into the ring, there was a chance I was going to get knocked out or lose on points. You have to be, when you go into any contested event, an election, a sporting event, a job interview, you better be mentally and mature enough to understand that you're going to lose. And then how you react to that is a reflection, I think, of who the individuals are as a person.
So you went on Press TV in May 26, 2020, and the headline was Trump's response to coronavirus has exposed his true colors. Do you remember what you were articulating there? Yeah,
his governing incompetence. Trump's first reaction to that was to be the strong man. And, Trump could have easily got reelected on COVID alone. Had he marshaled up all the tools at his disposal, and sent out and federalized the National Guard in each state, which nobody would have challenged, and distributed medical supplies and things of that nature, had he positively responded to that and used the tools at his disposal, he would have been so popular that Biden wouldn't have had a chance. The fact is, his first reaction was that he considered that to be a reflection, an attack on him, that China was deliberately releasing a virus to mess him up, to mess up his economy. He just totally bungled it. Now, not bungling it in terms of, should states have done more? Should Andrew Cuomo have shoved old people back into nursing homes? There's a lot of that to go around. But I'm talking about Trump had a golden opportunity to use all of the tools that are available to a president, particularly in a national crisis, and a national crisis that had been amplified by the media. He could have used all of those tools symbolically to have gotten himself reelected, and he chose to take it as an insult and an affront and poo-poo it. I mean, look at this. He's one himself. He and his whole family ended up with the virus, having to quarantine in the closing days of his campaign which had to have hurt him in the minds in terms of credibility. Credibility is important. Perception is important in American politics, and I think Trump bungled it on this. Whether you can take all the positions you want about coronavirus and how we've reacted to it, I think Trump could have used it much better. Much like the old Rahm Emanuel statement: never let an event always use an event. Don't remember. I'm paraphrasing.
Never let
Trump
a crisis
failed.
go to waste.
Right. Okay, there you go. Never let a crisis go to waste. I think Trump completely let coronavirus go to waste in terms of how he could have reacted, in terms of demonstrating all of the things that he talked about in 2016, being a good negotiator, getting things done, blah, blah, blah. I think that was the beginning of the end of him.
Rodney, it seems that for almost all the live streamers on the dissident right, they all seem to be unable to sustain group shows. They've all gone their own way. So it started out, you had JF Garapi and Andy Wolski. Now JF not only goes solo, he doesn't even have any guests. I did a show with Kevin for a year and a half, 5 days a week. Now we both split and gone solo. You had other people like Nick Fuentes and James Allsup, who used to do a show together. Now they've both gone solo. It seems like a definite trend that people on the dissident right, they all seem to inevitably split off from everyone that they were working with and end up primarily going solo. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, another reason why the left is far more successful in terms of media and things like this. The right are so rugged individualist Americans that they cannot accept the fact that sometimes you have to suck it up and for the benefit of the ideology or the plan. And so again, it's that personality issue, the inability of dissident right to check their ego in favor of the overall objective. The left does pursue something greater than themselves. They put themselves second. The right, these dissident right personalities, always puts themselves ahead of the agenda. And that is why they're always disappointed and losing and quitting and then they go to the extreme and make stupid statements and get themselves deplatformed. That's just my opinion. What's your take on it?
Yeah, I think it has something to do with the personality type. So I'm leaning more and more towards a person's psychology and psychological problems have a disproportionate influence on what politics they adopt, that often a politics is just a coping mechanism or an expression of some inner turmoil. And so it seems to be personality trait of people who are attracted to marginalized movements like the dissident right. They tend to be people who live on the margins and who, generally speaking, are unable to get along with other people for a sustained period of time. And so they inevitably marginalize themselves. It's precisely why they were attracted to a marginalized form of politics in the first place.
Well, I would narrow it down even more. I agree with everything you just said, but also there's a lack of impulse control on a large part of the dissident right. That's why they go out and do stupid things and end up with criminal records. They talk about, they're always being watched. They don't have to be watched by the FBI. The things that they say gets them in trouble, and then the things that they do. Then going back to impulse control, I mean, let's look at some of the poobahs that have risen and fallen. Richard Spencer, he has no financial skills. He's always broke. He's living with mama. There was the allegation, which I believed, about his issues with his wife. He's just simply, and then of course the skirt chasing, regardless, he doesn't even seek to skirt chase women that agree with him. He actually goes after the ones that actually oppose him, and then it's just he absolutely has no impulse control. Matt Heimbach, there you go. I mean, to me, this all boils down to IQ and impulse control. And primarily, if you don't have any impulse control, if you have issues where you just can't be disciplined, going back to Spencer, when Taki, I think it was Taki, gave him the job, his reaction was to go upstairs and puke on the carpet and not tell anybody. This is bad, and this all stems from people with defects that are seeking to compensate for those defects. I'll just leave it at that. I'm not a psychologist, but I can tell you impulse control gets a lot of people killed in battle, lack of impulse control. It also, there's a reason why some people succeed and other people's don't. I always chalk it up to impulse control.
Do you think the Biden administration will be able to reset America's relationship with Iran and return to the nuclear deal that Trump tore up?
I think he will. I think he'll try. I definitely think that's where he will go, but we'll see what happens. Biden is. I think that the extreme left is going to be extremely disappointed at Biden. I mean, I just seen an article, Luke, that I thought about you when I saw it, that sex workers, porn industry and sex workers are completely terrified of Kamala Harris because she did have a record in public office as being completely anti. She wasn't very enlightened when it came to porn and sex workers. So there was an article, and I can't remember.
Yeah, it's on the Drudge. It's on the Drudge Report if people are interested.
Yeah. Okay. So I saw it. I think it's Daily Beast. Isn't it a Daily Beast article?
Yeah.
Well, that's where I saw it, and I just thought that I think just people are going to be disappointed. I do not think that he's going to go to the extreme left of an AOC, but he is certainly. You notice who's not in the cabinet. We have not seen Beto O'Rourke get a job, and I think there's a reason for that. I think Biden has some decent political instincts where he understands the country is deeply divided. He has tried to address the schism within his own party, and he's coming in with his electors being challenged with a large now swath of the American population that view him as illegitimate. I think that those dynamics have modified how he's going to govern. I don't think that he is going to do the stupid extreme leftist stuff. At the same time, he is far from a conservative. I'll tell you, in history, I parallel him with Jimmy Carter in 1976. Jimmy Carter came in as a moderate, and actually he actually got more grief from his own party than the Republicans. Now, and he ended up being pretty much incompetent because he couldn't get anything done. I think Biden very well could be a replay of Jimmy Carter, an interlude between Republican presidents. Now, who the Republicans are going to run in 2024, we'll just have to wait and see. But I think Biden is coming in with a significant amount of his wings clipped.
Now, Iran has not launched terror attacks in the first world, in the West, to the best of my knowledge. Is there any reason to believe that this will change?
Well, neither has Cuba. And Cuba, I hear Trump wants to put Cuba on the state sponsor of terror, state sponsored list of terror list before he leaves office, which is kind of interesting because Cuba has always been pretty much open. They put troops in Angola, they had troops in Grenada, they did everything openly and according to the rules of traditional rules of war as a state. So I don't know. I don't see Iran doing that. I think that they will continue their proxy policy of supporting the Houthis, supporting Syria, and then continuing their influence in Iraq. Iran doesn't have desires beyond their region. Their region they've always considered themselves to be surrounded by hostiles. And of course, for the first time with Saddam gone and a Shia government dominating Iraq, they can secure that. And then, of course, their biggest issue, Luke, is Saudi Arabia. The Saudis and the Iranians have a tremendous dislike of one another, and that's putting it mildly. And so what you have is the Saudis have long time influenced the region by money. They would just send billions of dollars to countries, build mosques and all that. And there was a cost for that. That seemed to be waning. Where Iran, they found that distasteful. First of all, they can't afford to send billions and billions of dollars. but they can spread an ideology, which is, it's not Arab nationalism like Nasser. What Iran has been discussing is Islamic nationalism, a uniting of Islam, and that has gained some ground in the areas. And of course, Saudi Arabia's behavior has not helped them out. So I don't think you're going to see Iranian terrorist attacks in Berlin and Prague and Paris and doing a. Keep in mind, 9/11 was perpetrated primarily by Saudis.
What do you make of the trend of Arab states making some kind of peace and modus vivendi with Israel?
Well, it's the states that are doing it. Saudi Arabia hasn't done it yet. That would be big. But for the most part, the countries that have, I mean, Morocco did it because they were able to annex. They were able to annex a large swath of territory that they've been occupying. That was a political trade-off. Yeah, we'll recognize Israel if you recognize our sovereignty over these occupied territories on the southern coast of the Sahara. So, I mean, I think there's been a lot of political gamesmanship, and in some of the countries that have just formally entered into diplomatic relations, they've already had relations with Israel for years in terms of trade and other issues. So, I think if you look at it at who has normalized the relations, I think there's two dynamics. One, there's the political gain for the individual country. And then two, they're just accepting the reality on the ground. Israel's not going anywhere. And Israel has its own political dynamics and political turmoil going on. They're starting to resemble Italy, during the 80s and 90s, where you had to have an election every year because they couldn't have a government that would command a confidence vote in the parliament, or in Israel's case, the Knesset. So it's I think there's political reasons for it, and I think they're doing it for mostly their gain. I think there's something to be gained by those countries. Certainly Morocco, that was a big one. They had something to gain by it. And then some of the other countries, they're just formalizing something that they've been kind of doing under the table for quite some time. We have not seen Pakistan do it. We've not seen Saudi Arabia. That would be huge. We haven't seen them do it. And the odd man out in all of this, Luke, is the Palestinians, as usual.
Yeah.
But to some extent, they've cut their own nose off to spite their face. I think they should have taken the deal that was offered to them by
Ehud Barak.
Ehud Barak, yeah. I think I've been a fan of his for quite a long time, and I think that he made a genuine effort. And for them not to accept that deal, I think they crippled themselves politically in the eyes of the Arab world as well.
Okay, have you read any good books lately?
I just finished. It was an abridgment to the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and I just got bored and I started reading it, and so I've been doing that. I'll be honest. I've been kind of dealing with some medical issues the last few weeks, so I've been kind of tired. I've been actually watching more videos, Luke, than reading because it's just easier.
And
I've been listening to your show.
Oh, thank you. Do you have any video recommendations or movie recommendations?
The Luke Ford Show, and and especially since people get offended that you unfollow them, I wouldn't get offended at all. But if Luke Ford unfriended me, I would just email Luke Ford instead of tag him on Twitter, because then I know he can just hit delete unless I put something snappy in the subject line. But I've been, believe it or not, the streaming situation where you can actually get an Amazon Fire Stick. It really opens up a lot of opportunities. If I'm at the hospital, I can just plug that into my laptop, and I have a lot of options to look at.
Okay, Rodney, any final words for today?
No, thanks for the time, Luke. Wanted to stop in and say hi, because I actually like the topic you were talking about. It's just some of the things we see on social media and posts. I'm wondering if people, if they would actually be proud of that 5 years from now. Sadly, I think some would. A lot of people don't grow, Luke. That's my observation.
Okay, Rodney, good to talk to
All
you,
right.
my friend. Take care.
Have a great day, Luke.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So I'm a big fan of this book, The Intellectuals and the Masses, Pride and Prejudice Among the Literary Intelligentsia, 1880 to 1939. It's just a little taste. So he talks about H.G. Wells regarded the world outside of Europe as essentially barbaric. And he saw the inhabitants of the Orient and Africa as obstacles to human progress. In India, Africa, China, the Far East, Wells said, there's a rapid increase of low-grade population, undersized physically and mentally, and retarding the mechanical development of civilization. Well, in the Far East and in China, we're talking about people with average IQs higher than the average IQs in Europe. But to H.G. Wells, these decadent communities outside the Atlantic capitalist system, almost no intelligence could be found. Nobody was capable there of grasping H.G. Wells's plans for world improvements. And an even more insidious evil was newspapers. So intellectuals loathed mass newspapers and women. So H.G. Wells was highly susceptible to feminine allure, but he believed that women destroy civilization. He said it was their unchecked fertility that was to blame for the population problem, and women use their sex appeal to captivate young men, force them into marriage, and tie them to the breadwinning treadmill and effectively end their lives as thinkers. So H.G. Wells regarded women as by nature extravagant, addicted to clothes, to chatter, and to shopping. He complained that there was not a single woman who wouldn't lick the boots of a Jew or marry a N-word rather than live decently on 100 pounds a year. In his later nonfiction works, H.G. Wells examined how we would go about exterminating inferior breeds and become much more selective with allowing people to reproduce. So he conceded that the science of genetics was imperfect, so selective breeding was currently impractical. He liked the idea in principle. He wanted only certain couples to be allowed to have children. But he said the selection of those couples currently exceeds human knowledge. He wanted to restrict parenthood to those who have money and intelligence and who will be responsible child rearers. Said that authorities should set minimum standards of clothing, cleanliness, growth, nutrition, and education. If these standards are not met, the child should be taken away and reared by the state at the parents' expense. If the parents fail in their payments, they should be put into celibate labor establishments, concentration camps, essentially, to work off their debt. They should not be released until the debt is fully discharged. And this will ensure a fall in the birth rate of those who are improvident, vicious, and feeble. So H.G. Wells is often thought of as a rationalist, and there is an element of that, but much of his thought is driven by his instinctive reactions to newspapers, to advertising, to women, to cities. He wanted to return to peasant life, and destruction was far more attractive to him than progress. Reducing the world's population was an obsession for H.G. Wells in fantasy. He took again and again, and with mounting savagery, a terrible revenge on the suburban sprawl that had blighted his hometown. All right, let's see what's going on with Joseph Cotto was on the kill stream.
I don't waste much time playing. And yeah, there's Worski saying he will come in and say hi. Zero Depressive says, my idea, Assange becomes Muslim and trans. Voila. Reyes, 84, the Ninja Genie. Oh, wait, I read that one earlier. Lotus Machine says, both these guys, very, not kind word that he said about both you guys. That's rude. Winston Fujimori says, pardon Assange, Snowden, Ulbricht, and Cody Wilson. I would co-sign that for sure. Worski says, let's go. He says, I was sick for 1 week after the election. Dude, we hit it too hard. That was a rough one. All right, let's get some callers in. Southern Dingo's Religious Guide. Hello?
Oh, hello?
Yes, Southern Dingo's Religious Guide. What's up, sir?
Sorry, it's delayed, Dingo. I guess I never hear you say, like, Dingo, you're on air or whatever, so I missed the first part.
It's all right. You're here, though, now, buddy. It's good to hear your voice.
Is my voice that nice?
No, not really. I was just being nice, but it's good to hear from you is what I meant.
Well,
No.
how are you going to give me that and then take it away like that?
I just meant it was good to hear from you.
Well, okay, fine, but you just shouldn't wrap it in such a nice package. That's not part of it.
You called me out. You called me out. Of course, your voice is lovely, Dingo. All right, go ahead.
All right, cool. I have a question for the man in the glasses that you keep getting his name wrong.
Not wrong. I just mispronounced it once. But go ahead.
That's not wrong. It's just right in a different way. No, I'm just kidding. Okay. Yeah, so I heard you mention a couple of things that really caught my ear, and I have a question about both of them. The first one would be, you said that the GOP is in the right direction, and you evidenced that with the increase in minority votes from minorities to Trump, right? But I would pose this to you. Oh, go ahead. What?
I just want to make sure that I got it. You said my perspectives. I think the GOP is headed in the right direction, and that's proven because Trump got a larger share of the minority vote, right?
Yes, that's what you said.
No, please go ahead.
Okay, cool. Well, I would posit to you that like what happened in this election versus 2016 is Trump actually got less of the white vote this time, and he lost. But he got more of the non-white vote, and you know what I'm saying? Like, why would it not be the right direction to stop pandering to minorities who generally, on the whole, in the past, and including now, you know, they're not right-leaning, whatever you want to call it. They mostly vote Democrat, especially blacks, like almost down the line there. You know, why would it not be a winning strategy to ignore them and go explicitly after white people the way Democrats go after non-white people?
I think that
why would you rather lose with minorities than win with whites?
Well, I would rather win, period. I think that the GOP needs to obviously win a large majority of the white vote. And the thing of it is that trying to appeal to whites, they're so politically, they have no sense of political cohesion like a lot of other groups do. So if you appeal to one subset of whites, you lose another subset of whites. There's not really, unless you're talking about the South, that's maybe beginning to fade a bit, but it's hard to really appeal to whites on the whole. But the GOP does absolutely need to win an overall majority of the white vote, and it needs to represent the share of the white community, if you will, that's willing to vote Republican. It needs to represent its interests, period. It's just as any party that has any other communities as constituency should be representing that community's interests. But at the same time, a lot of whites are trending leftward, particularly ones who get liberal arts degrees from colleges, especially women, especially those women who have college degrees that live in suburbs. And this is something that can't be overlooked. And so the GOP needs to find some way of offsetting this leftward trend among that demographic. And it needs to have some friendly minority groups that it can appeal to, or at least subsets of minority groups, even minorities are much more, as I said, politically cohesive than whites are. It needs to do that. So it needs to get the overall majority of the white vote, and it has to get a larger and larger share of certain minority groups, generally these minorities who are opposed to political correctness and Marxist economics. So it needs to
bring up a good point.
Yeah, it can't forsake the whites for non-whites, and it can't forsake non-whites. It needs to have a broad.
You bring up a very interesting point, and I've never actually heard it put this way, but I'm glad that you did, because it leads me into this. So you said that whites are generally not very politically, cohesive, and I agree with you. And you said that non-whites are generally politically cohesive, and I agree with that as well. And I think that you would be trying to sell me, a ketchup popsicle when I'm wearing white gloves if you said anything other than the reason for that is because non-whites are allowed to be racially cohesive, like they're to take pride in their race explicitly, right? I mean, and whites are not. We are disallowed from that. If anybody that does gets in trouble, right? So wouldn't it be a winning strategy for the GOP to become the white party? Why not? Start with explicit being pro-white? Why? But what you
well, I think what Southern Dingo is missing here is that there may be genetic and historical and cultural factors whereby whites just find the grubby racial battle for spoils of political patronage just distasteful. So it may well be that certain whites, particularly say Anglo-Saxons and Nordics, perhaps may be less inclined towards racial cohesion due to historic and genetic factors than say other groups.
You said is correct. And if you think it's not because whites cannot be racially cohesive, right? Then explain to me why all non-whites are racially and politically cohesive, and whites are the exact opposite.
It's there's a bit of, I was to say the Hispanics, but they're really not one race or another. There's something of a misnomer. But because there is a bit of political diversity there. But looking at the white community, I think because it doesn't want to be cohesive, that's the issue there. It rejects the sort of racialized politics that are politically and socially okay for minorities to engage in, and that's a big deal. Politically, it's politically correct to have a sort of political cohesion within various minority communities, but it's not for whites. That's the bottom line. There's no getting around it.
Okay, I agree with you.
And that's a part. Oh, you agree?
Go ahead. I'm shut up. Good.
No, I'm glad we agree on that. No, that's just what's considered politically correct. But a lot of whites would reject the GOP becoming explicitly pro-white party because they believe that racial identity politics are beneath them. So the GOP needs to get as much of the white vote as it can. There's no question about that. And it needs to do that by being, one might say, implicitly pro the interests of its bedrock community, but not explicitly so, because that's how you would get maximal support among whites. And you also wouldn't want to alienate minorities who would be willing to support you. So the GOP has to go down a road of essentially walking on a tightrope, as difficult as that is. It needs to do that in order to get as many whites as possible. It needs to do that.
Yeah, every politician needs to walk a tightrope because every vote, every action, and every word that you say publicly, it has the potential to fire up your base and also fire up the energy of your opposition. And ideally, to be effective, you want to give as little energy and fire to your opposition as possible while maintaining the enthusiasm of your own voters. So let's get James Allsup on Millenniyule.
But if your stuff has been explicitly political, and you're still being political, but you're just not saying anything of any worth, then yeah, it's kind of tragic. It's someone who's been castrated.
It is, and it's someone who, and again, this is not to begrudge anybody. People are looking out for themselves and doing what they need to do, and I totally understand that. But the effect that it has is convincing people, and you see this in internet dialectics too, and the optics debate generally, where people think as long as we don't talk about certain topics, then we can continue to spread our message. But those important topics, like, really, it's talking about those that are setting the parameters of debate, those that control the West. We know who these people are. If you can't talk about them, then you can't talk about anything important, because that is that key ingredient that you need to make everything else fall into place. It's the decoder ring. It's the cipher that you need to understand why everything happens as it does. Because without understanding that element,
Okay, so this is an example of how juvenile some of the politics is on the alt-right. There is no magic decoder ring. There is no magic key to understanding how the world works. And it's not the Jews, and it's not the Chinese, and it's not the Saudis. There is no magic decoder ring. This is just an example of juvenile thinking.
you can't understand why, for example, the United States in the COVID relief bill is giving another $500 billion to Israel. You can't understand these.
Okay, the United States is not giving $500 billion to Israel. Any Israel or Sudanese or Pakistani aid in the so-called COVID relief bill. It's not in the COVID relief bill. The COVID relief bill is part of a stopgap combination of 12 different bills. So there was nothing in the COVID relief bill about funding Israel. But James Allsup just does not understand how basic politics works, and how you get at the end of various legislative sessions, you get all these different bills put into one giant bill.
To believe that to change the society around you, all you need to do, and this is especially pronounced in America, but the best way to do that is to go out there and run for office and make a change. And the electoral process.
So a lot of these personalities on the alt-right, they got attention and viewership disproportionate to their talent by staking out positions that ordinary talented people eschew. So because he's on the alt-right, because he's a dissident, James Allsup has been able to attract a much larger audience than he would have if he was simply a conventional Republican, when he'd have to go up against very skilled live streamers and hosts such as Rush Limbaugh or a Tucker Carlson or a Sean Hannity. So what happens when you get this audience that's disproportionate to your talents, and I've experienced this too. This is not me speaking about people outside of myself. This is me speaking to me. The reason I've often got an audience disproportionate to my talents is that I was tackling a topic that ordinary people with a high regard for their own well-being would not talk about. And so I had all these grubby topics increasingly to myself. Therefore, I was able to achieve an audience entirely disproportionate to my talents. When I shifted the things that I talk about on my blog or on my show to topics where much smarter and more erudite and more talented people than me would also speak on them, suddenly my audience went down to 5% of what it used to be. And the main thing that was going on there is that when I shifted from a grubby topic that nobody decent wanted to touch to a mainstream topic, then suddenly I had to compete with people who are far more talented, far more intelligent, far more erudite, far more skillful, far more compelling than me. And so instead of getting over 100 viewers every time I did a show, I'd get over 10 viewers, all right? And it wasn't because my talents changed. It's that I switched from a grubby topic to a mainstream topic. And so when James Allsup speaks out on mainstream topics like the omnibus spending bill, it exposes him as somebody who doesn't know very much. And it exposes him as someone who's got an inflated sense of his own worth and value because he's been dealing in grubby topics for so long, thereby able to command a much larger audience than his talents would otherwise give him.
Is just so second nature for Americans who want to change something about their society that it becomes a very appealing option for people. And when there's a force out there, a very well-paid contingent, telling people, yeah, it's as easy as taking over the Republican Party. It's as easy as changing things within the party. Then we'll get what we want. People will think, okay, I'll go along with that. I'll try that. But in the process, look, I've been involved in party politics. I've been involved in campaigns. I've done the 16-hour door knock for candidates before.
Yeah, and you're a guy who's about 25 years of age and doesn't exactly know very much. You have a certain glibness, right? You're able to sound like you know something, without actually knowing very much. So a lot of people, like a Nick Fuentes and a James Allsup, are incredibly glib without necessarily having much depth.
You spend a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of mental energy, importantly, placing this as the highest priority. And we know, based on how the system is structured, it will all be for naught. So for people out there who are looking for answers, I think placing electoral participation at the top of what you're going to do to better yourself is a fallacy. And if you want to actually better yourself, and I don't claim to be the biggest expert on this, but things like forging healthy relationships with your family, healthy relationships with your neighbors, getting to know people around you, forging healthy relationships with women is something that for a lot of people who have come out of like the MRA sphere and
yeah, come on, guys, clean your room,
have seen sexual relationships as another political entity, this can be challenging. And look, this is not to discount third wave feminism. All of that is obviously a problem, but doing things that are concrete that can actually put you in a better position to live a healthy and prosperous life, where you're not going to be feeling as much pressure from this system. These are all great things that people.
Look, if I had never blogged on the porn industry, if I had never done live streams about the dissident right, I would effectively be a non-entity online. So I got to have a disproportionate influence and audience compared to my talents. And I think the same thing is true for virtually everybody on the right. So Richard Spencer would not be a political entity unless he had occupied himself with the grubby ground of racial nationalism. Millennial Woes would not be a major online figure if he had not specialized in the grubby ground of racial nationalism. Same for all the guys on the right stuff. If Eric Stryker and Mike Enoch had to compete on a level playing field with, say, other radio talk show hosts within the Overton window, they might have a show, overnight or in some kind of small market, but they would not have the audience that they do.
People can do, and they're much more useful expenditures of energy, I would say, than electioneering.
I had a guy on last night called Luke Smith, and he was basically saying a similar thing, that you should concentrate on self-improvement and in improving your own life and maximizing your control over your own life.
So how much self-improvement talk can you take from people who have lives that aren't exactly inspiring or sterling, right? They can say the same things as people who have lives that work. How effective and useful are they?
A qualified no. And this is the same problem with the Civil War predictions people have, is what would the battle lines be, right? What would the balkanization lines be in this case? Because I think people are so turned against one another, neighbor against neighbor. There's so much division in the U.S., even within these regional these regions that would be in theory the different balkanized areas. I just don't see how that happens. And I think, to be honest, that the United States system, the corporate media governmental system, is strong enough that it could prevent that. And balkanization is a very serious step. And even when states have tried to do things that are further scaled back from that, express their sovereignty in other ways, they have been punished for doing so. For example, in North Carolina, when they passed a law requiring people, transgenders, to use the bathroom of their biology, they were simply threatened economically by major corporations, including the NBA and others, and they were forced to pull back. And so, because of not even globalization of our economy, but this highly financialized economy we have, there are so many levers of power over different states and over different communities that it's very hard for a state or for a community to express their will and to stand up to the Leviathan. So.
And Rodney Martin throws down a $25 super chat. He says, alt-right mirrors Black Lives Matter by ginning up low IQ and ill-informed supporters with grievance-based diatribes and outright misinformation. Let's play a little bit more here from James Allsup on Millenniyule.
At the Kushner's home, kind of odd. So there are a lot of connections there, and that's just scratching the surface. And you look back on the never Trumpers, people like Bill Kristol, people like Ben Shapiro, many of them, sharing a same common ancestry, shall we say, who came out so hard against Trump in 2016. You have to wonder whether that was a legitimate fear or whether that was done in order to make Trump seem more legitimate, in order to legitimize him as a real threat against this neoconservative, neoliberal order. And I don't know definitively, and I don't think anybody will ever know definitively. Maybe we will decades from now. But I think that given the evidence we have, and given the Trump administration's total unwillingness to fight on any of the key issues, being immigration, being race, and what has emerged on the other side of the Trump presidency.
Okay, that's absurd. The Trump administration did fight on the issue of immigration, and they were highly effective, the most effective administration with regard to reducing immigration since the Eisenhower administration with its wetback raids that sent back approximately 1 million illegal Mexican agents. All right, let's have a look here from another Millenniyule. Some guy quoting himself anti-democratic.
How's it going to happen? We've got to think about from where we are here and now.
This is the biggest problem with the dissident right now, is that they don't have any power. They don't have any plan to get any power. They even kind of in some places seem to find it like an imposition to tell them that they're going to need power to get some of these things done. Again, a goal is not a plan. Or as Antoine de Saint-Exupéry put it, a goal without a plan is just a wish. And I wish for unicorns and gold bricks. It's, yeah, okay. But the two things we need to get to right now are we are reaching the limit of red pilling and we are reaching the limit of having goals. It's time to have some kind of plan. It's time to take some kind of action. Now, it's time to take the right action. It's time to think about what we're going to do. Because, Charlottesville was an attempted action. It was just a really bad one and was a complete disaster. So we need to not do that anymore. But, it's time to start really thinking of how are we going to get some kind of power? Otherwise, nice idea, bro, but it's a wish.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry if I was a little tough on the question asked.
Okay, I missed James Allsup on the JQ, so let me play that.
These are the young guys. These are America First politicians. They're really going to end immigration this time, guys. We promise, seriously. But it's not going to happen. And you need to be very wary of the next iteration of the trick. And you need to inoculate yourselves. People need to inoculate themselves against falling for that again.
Right. Okay. I don't know if there's anything that I would say about this. It's a big topic, and I'm aware that time is running short. So I'll just move on to the next question. Now, what I would ask you about that, do you think that Trump was a GOP trick in that sense? Because you said that they realized they had to go a bit further. So do you think the Republican Party were actually on board? Because it looked like, from outside, it looked like they were on board only after they realized they had no choice. Like, this guy's won the nomination and all that. So what would you say about that?
It's tough, and I don't want to definitively say, from afar, diagnose what's going on in someone's mind. What I will say is that we know that Donald Trump's father was a frequent contributor to synagogues in New York. He donated land to build synagogues in New York. Donald Trump himself has donated millions of dollars to Israeli settlements in the West Bank. He is someone who has been close with Benjamin Netanyahu for a long time. They have been, their families have been very closely aligned. In fact, when Benjamin Netanyahu was serving as the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, is when he first became introduced, and this was back in the, I want to say 70s. That's when he first became introduced to Fred Trump, Donald Trump's father. So there are a lot of connections these two families have together. Of course, Ivanka Trump married to Jared Kushner, the Kushner family close to the Netanyahus, close enough, in fact, that when Netanyahu visited the United States, he would sleep over at the Kushner's home. Kind of odd. So there are a lot of connections there, and that's just scratching the surface.
What's odd about donating to your religion, and what's odd about being a powerful person who has connections to other powerful people?
I would say no, but there are some exceptions that are just so direct that I'm almost in admiration of the people that have them. For example, there was one I saw just a few days ago that said, dead pedophiles don't reoffend. And I had to do a double take because I wasn't sure if I read that correctly, but I did. So something like that, I would say right on, because I don't think anybody's going to be messing with your car or truck if you have something like that on there. Yeah, you have to make a value judgment based on where you live.
All right. James, hung out with you at Amren. You're a good dude. What do you think about Patrick Casey's decision to disband AIM? Is the membership model the wrong approach for 2021?
Well, it's the right approach if you are going to get in bed with, figuratively, perhaps literally, with people who are noted FBI informants and allies of the ADL, people who work closely with the ADL, people like Milo Yiannopoulos, who, and I've done the research on this. This is irrefutable research. You can find it on dissident-mag.com. The article is titled "The America First Movement Has a Federal Agent Problem." And yeah, I don't want to turn this into a personal thing or whatever, but look, a membership organization can be fine if you have leadership that is serious about security. On the other hand, if you have leadership that continues to bring their members onto unsecure platforms and allow them to be repeatedly doxxed and then do nothing to help them, not even give them a phone call afterwards, that's a problem. If you are sharing videos on your Twitter that have been released by Milo Yiannopoulos that actually redox members of your organization, that's a problem. So yeah, but look, like I said, these people have been very well paid for their services, and mission accomplished.
Okay, redox is not a very strong point, and much of what he's talking about there could just as easily be accounted for by incompetence rather than malevolence or being a federal agent.
Accomplished, I think, if you're them.
Okay, I wonder what Lionel has to
There's
say.
no martial law. There's no nothing. And the people are, military police, patriots with a gun will take back the cities. No, they're not. What does that mean? I don't know. I write this stuff. I don't. Some of the stuff is fantastic. There is a slight chance. There is? Well, it depends what you mean by. I want you in hospice care. Well, there is a chance. Lazarus, they did it before. Okay. And they keep saying this. Well, there's a chance. What does it mean? I don't know what the chance is. I just say this stuff. I don't know what the chance is. I just like to say it. And sedition. What's sedition? I don't know. When was the last time anybody got charged with sedition? What are you asking me for? You brought up sedition. I just say this stuff. I don't know what I'm... Treason. Treason? And giving aid and comfort to the enemy? War? What are you talking about? I didn't read the statute. Shouldn't you have read it? No. To me, treason is just a word. It's like a thing. It's like a, kind of like a... Who's tired of this? Who is... And by the way, this is not... I've got a bit of hope. I've just got a little bit of hope. Don't mock my hope. There's no chance. I know that. Nobody's even remotely hinted from anywhere. Rush Limbaugh. Nobody. The only one of the people online go like this, who are trying to get those social media numbers. Are you on the phone? Did you have anything? Did Jenna, Alice, Rudy? I don't even know where. Have anybody heard from Rudy? Is Rudy anywhere? Is he okay? Is he? Because all of a sudden, they're just gone. Joe DeGenna, he's being sued, and Victoria Tenzing, I don't know if they're doing anything. Jenna Ellis is still, she's maybe citing biblical verse. Who knows? Where's Rudy? Where's? I got a little hope. Dan, I hope. Your hope is delusional. I don't care if it's delusional. I just want to say, yeah. I've never seen anything like this. Nobody on my team is like this. Well, we're gonna hang in there until this isn't the Alamo. You know what I mean? The Alamo is like, listen, we're gonna go. We have no way out. We're gonna fight to the last man. I got that. That's the Alamo. I got it. Fort Apache, the Bronx. Yeah, I got that. I've seen that. But this is just, it's weird. And the president should be out there every single day. And you can say whatever you want. He should have explained a little bit better his idea behind Section 230. What's going on? We got to read it through a tweet. And it looks like he's holed up. And I know he's not writing this up, but capital letters and misspelling. And he's just firing these tweets out. That's not good. That's not the last thing you are going to be remembered for. And if people don't understand legacy, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. The latest also is that everybody is going out of their minds with the latest. I think somebody is sitting in it. And okay, CDC. Okay, here we go. Ready? Tell them the numbers have doubled. Yes, try that. Just tell them. What does that mean? I don't know. What numbers? Numbers somewhere. They're dumb. There's a new strain. What's good? Yeah, there's a new strain. Papa's got a brand new strain. Yeah, in the membrane, inside in the brain. And is the new strain stronger? Is it more deadly? Never thought about that. Could a strain be not as bad? Yeah, I guess so. So what are you saying? I don't know. Gotta get those vaccines out. Oh, and what about those vaccines? In Mallorca, you're gonna have to carry on your Apple Wallet. You're gonna have your your vaccine card, which is what they did in China. We know about that. And don't forget the quantum dot die, which we've been talking about. MIT's been saying it since the beginning. We know all about that. Remember, we talked about that. Yes, we talked about that one. Yes. And we're gonna see and now they're saying, is there gonna be a lockdown? What was that thing yesterday? I think we said about, you're gonna love this. On Times Square, you have an avatar. This is so stupid. First of all, anybody who goes, I have never been anywhere near the ball on New Year's Eve. I had to, one time I drove kind of sort of through near. It was terrible. It was awful. I had to drive to get to a car. It was terrible. Anybody who does that is just nuts. 60% of educators, students, and parents, this is what they're saying, will never return to in classroom. 60% never will? 60% will never return back to classes. I don't know what that means. I don't know how you do that. Yeah, everything can be done online. Okay. Well, that's listen, there may actually be something to that. I don't know. Now, for everyone that you mean, or that you know who has a bad attitude, there are other people that you say this, we'll never be able to go to the movies again. Okay, fine. We'll never have concerts. The best one I heard recently was, we'll never have buffets again. Ooh, that's interesting. We'll never be able to go to church. Okay, take it easy. We'll never be. And I can't argue with them, but you want to talk about putting yourself in a really, okay, well, let's see about this. No. We'll have shuttered closed. Remember PS 142? They closed it after the COVID. They never reopened. People never went to school anymore. Well, they said it was online, but not really. Nobody really did it. They didn't verify it. It all changed after COVID. Nothing. No more schools, no more dances, no more churches, no more funerals, no more marriages, no more nothing. But bars and marijuana dispensaries, they stayed open. But that was it. And then there are these people who come along like Dennis Prager, the genius, who says, you ever wonder why you can sit on a plane and have a sandwich next to somebody on a plane at 4 inches away, but you can't go to a restaurant? What the hell is that all about? It's the Seinfeld hour. And if masks work, well, shouldn't the numbers be going down because we're all wearing masks? It's like it's this bad, stand-up routine. It's just, we're kind of just stuck. And Trump could be doing so much more to kind of making us either helping the transition or maybe starting to challenge them by saying things like, well, I hope they've got their China.
Okay, guys, maybe you should see somebody.
I'm very excited to be here with Lori, who I've known for like 20 years or so.
Long time.
But every time I read something of hers or see someone interview her, I am more confused and impressed by you because there's some other entire career you've had that I didn't know about, like going to medical school or being in television production or now you're a therapist and you're also, I know you mostly as a journalist and a writer. So I've only done one thing, which makes me feel very insecure when I talk to you. So let's do some therapy for me.
I thought we were going to do group therapy, actually. You guys didn't know what you were signing up for when you got here.
I think that's what they were hoping for, to be honest. Like, they look a little tense. This is the first time they've looked up from a screen in many, many years.
Congratulations
on the book.
Thank you.
It's been on the New York Times bestseller list for 6, 8, how many weeks?
8.
8 weeks. That's you and Michelle Obama are the only. That's amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, and the book, which I'm sure you're about to read, is amazing. The concept being, if you don't know, you talk about both being a therapist and then going to therapy.
Right. So in the book, I follow the stories of 4 very different patients, and then there's a 5th patient, and that 5th patient is me as I go through my own therapy during an upheaval in my own life while I'm helping other people with their own struggles.
And one of the interesting things to me, many interesting things about being human, is that you kind of know what you're not supposed to do as a patient, because you've seen people front in different ways. You've seen all the mistakes that people make, and then you go and make those mistakes yourself when you see a therapist.
Yeah. So when, I think it's interesting when you're training, you go to therapy as part of your hours for licensure. But it's very different. You still feel like a patient then. You're just an intern. You don't really know anything. And then once you've been practicing for a while and you go back, it's a very different experience. It's very hard to take off your therapist hat and just be a person in the room. So I do with my therapist all the things that I end up seeing my patients do with me. I want him to like me. When I leave and there's another patient in the waiting room, she looks so like nice and put together, and I wonder, does he dread my sessions and look forward to hers? One night, since we're at Google, I should mention this. I Google him. I should mention that the reason I got into therapy, I landed in therapy at that moment in my life was I was planning to marry my boyfriend, and we were planning this life together, and he tells me that he's decided that he can't live with a kid under his roof for the next 10 years.
And
that kid was my 8-year-old, and my 8-year-old had not been hiding in a closet the whole time we were dating, so this came as quite a surprise to me. And my version of the story when I go to therapy, and I really want to emphasize my version of the story because we'll talk a little bit about what people bring to you and how there are lots of other perspectives that they might not be sharing with you in those initial sessions, is that, he's a sociopath because, who would do that? And my therapist doesn't agree with that assessment. So one night when I'm obsessing over the boyfriend, and my therapist says to me, you need to stop.
Yeah, it's interesting. I notice particularly women often want you to agree that their partner is a psychopath.
Google stalking your boyfriend because he would post pictures of salads in restaurants, and that meant to me, well, I didn't mean anything to him because he's going to restaurants and he's enjoying salads. So my therapist says you need to stop Googling him. So when you have the urge to Google him, do something different. So I'm sitting there at my laptop and I think, okay, I'm not going to type his name into the search engine. And so I'm going to do something different. So I type in my therapist's name, and that's what I do instead. And I end up going down the Google rabbit hole and finding out nothing weird or creepy about my therapist, but just all of a sudden I have information about my therapist that I didn't before. So I do what my patients do with me, and I know that they Google me because inevitably they slip up. They'll say things like, well, you know what it's like to raise a boy, and I've never told them I'm a parent or that I have a son or anything like that.
And it's important to not know much about it, because I'm sure most people Google their therapists.
Well, so you say that, right? I don't know. Show of hands. How many of you have Googled your therapist? There we go. Okay.
Wait, how many of you have therapists that you haven't Googled? So it's like 50-50, right? No? I'm not good with math. Maybe we should get someone else here to do this.
Yeah, I think all of you can do that. So some people do and some people don't.
Interesting. I can't imagine having any human interaction where I don't Google someone beforehand. Do you know what I mean?
Wow.
I want to know what I'm getting into, if there's information to be had. But the argument that you make in the book is that a therapist, in essence, is kind of a blank slate.
Well, I think that the point is that nobody wants to go and talk to a brick wall. Nobody wants to go talk to a robot. And so, the irony is that I say at the beginning of the book that my most important credential is that I'm a card-carrying member of the human race. My humanity is my greatest tool in the therapy room, and yet people don't really want to hear about it. I talk about in the book that I had a colleague who she had been trying to get pregnant and had a really tough time, and she finally got pregnant. She was standing in a Starbucks when her OB called and said that the pregnancy wasn't viable, and she burst into tears standing in that Starbucks. And a patient happened to walk in, saw the crying therapist, left, and never came back. And so, I think there's that tension between wanting your therapist to be a real person and also not wanting to see their humanity.
So you want them to have enough life experience where they can give you advice, but you don't want to know that they have emotions, or what is it, or that they have trouble, or what is it that Googling your therapist? What's the down?
So for example, when I Googled my therapist, I found out that his father had died at a relatively young age, middle-aged, but he had been a marathon runner and he had suddenly died of a heart attack, per the obituary I found. And so I had been waxing poetic in my therapy sessions about my close relationship with my own father, who was about to turn 80, and he was ill, and I was so glad that I had this time with him where we could say goodbye and really have these important moments together. And I didn't know this about my therapist until I Googled him. So now when I went back to therapy, I was editing myself. I felt like, well, I don't want to talk about this beautiful relationship that I'm having, this goodbye that I'm having with my father, because it might make him feel bad. And the problem with editing yourself, of course, is that you can't feel free to talk about anything that you want to talk about. And he noticed it. He noticed that I was editing myself. He didn't know why, but he noticed it, and I eventually confessed to it, and all the air returned to the room. And we had this incredible discussion about my father on a completely different level that we couldn't have had if I had been hiding that information. And I think, the other thing, you mentioned earlier is that people often keep secrets from their therapists. So there are the secrets that we keep from the world and from the people that we know. And then there are secrets we keep from our therapists. And then there are secrets we keep from ourselves. And Carl Jung called secrets psychic poison because secrets are really corrosive, but they're also all about shame. And so when people come in and they tell me their stories, I'm listening to what I like to say is the music under the lyrics. I'm listening to their story, but I'm also listening to what they're not telling me. What is the sort of underlying pattern or struggle that got them there in the first place that maybe they have some shame around? And so they're telling the story in a certain way. And I'm listening for what are the parts that they're not telling me.
I'm avoiding giving away anything in the book because it really reads like a story or a couple stories, and then they have real arcs. So I know I've talked to you in the past in front of an audience, almost gave stuff away. But what kind of things? It shocks me that people hide things from their therapists. Because to me, the thrill of going to a therapist is to tell them all the junk I won't tell anyone else.
Well, I also think there's like a gender difference there. So men will come in and they'll say, I've never told anyone this before, and then what they tell me is so mild. It's like, there's this thing with my neighbor. It's like, what? That was the thing you've never told anyone before? Women will come in and they'll say, I've never told anyone this before, except for my mother, my sister, and my best friend. So like they've told some people, and the thing that they have been holding, the thing that feels very private to them is usually a lot deeper than I can see why they have shame around it. With men, I think it's so hard culturally for them to be vulnerable on any level. So, it's interesting that when you say, why do people keep secrets? Again, I think it has to do with if I tell you the truth of who I am, you may not like me, you may lose respect for me, I may be shunned. And the reality is that the truth of who they are is what draws me toward them. And I think that's the glue, that's what draws people toward one another. It's where we see ourselves in each other. It's the connections that we make with each other comes from revealing the truth of who we are. So the irony is that the performative aspect where people come and they want to kind of entertain you and be funny and all of that, that bores me. That's when I'm going to get bored. But if you actually show me who you are, I'm going to be very interested in your story.
So have you been listening to any of the Howard Stern interviews? Because he has a book out.
Yes.
So he talks about how therapy just changed his life as a human being and even as an interviewer and the show. But he talks about when he first went to therapy, he started doing his show for the therapist and imitating his parents, and the therapist was not laughing and not amused. And that's kind of a heightened version of what you're talking about, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, so many times we come to therapy and we think, I'm going to make this person like me. And it's a way of not talking about what you really need to be talking about.
I'm wondering why people want their therapist to like. Is it because you're going to show so much of yourself that if this person doesn't like you, you suck? Or why is it that you want your therapist to like you? It's someone you're paying and that's seeing outside of this room, so why do you care?
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
You don't want your therapist to like you?
I've never been to more than like 2 or 3 sessions in a row. So I've never had like a therapist that way. I've gone for issues or for dumb reasons. But so you want your therapist to like you because you want everyone to like you?
I think even so. I think that we have sort of a natural human need to want to be liked and also to want to be understood, right? And so we're giving. Well, they're different, but when you share your story, so I'm listening not just for the story that someone is telling me, but I'm listening to their flexibility with the story. So often somebody is gunning for you to validate their story, as I was when I went to my therapist. My story was clearly my boyfriend is missing some marbles because who does that? And how did he not know that earlier? And that was my story. And I wanted validation. And I talk a lot in the book about the difference between idiot compassion and wise compassion. So idiot compassion is what our friends do. Yeah, he's a jerk. Yeah, your boss shouldn't have done that. Yeah, your coworker was like that. But wise compassion is what a therapist does, which is they hold up a mirror to you and help you to see your reflection in a way that maybe you would choose not to. So my therapist, his question was, well, how did you not see this? What was your role in this? And I had to be willing to look at that in order to see the story more accurately so that I wouldn't repeat that kind of thing again. And it's really important that we listen to the wise compassion. It's very hard to do with your friends or with your partner because they have agendas. Partly they want to help you, but the other part of their agenda is, but if you change in this way, you will make my life less difficult, right? And so we're very averse to change, the wise compassion, when it comes from our partners or our friends. But when a therapist does it, they don't have an agenda. And I think sometimes we're more open to that.
And the idiot compassion is what we should practice with our partners? Like you should not attempt wise compassion with your partner, right?
I think there are ways to do it. I think that people welcome that kind of feedback, but I think it has to be done in a certain way that maybe sometimes when people are doing it because of their agenda, it doesn't come across that way. It doesn't come across in, I really want to help you see something. It comes across as, when you do that, it bothers me.
Mm-hmm. And the wise compassion, a lot of that is just seeing other people's perspective, right?
It's seeing yourself in a way that you aren't able to. I think a lot of what happens is we come to therapy and we want someone to say, yes, you're right. Yes, this is what happened. No, you shouldn't talk to your mother-in-law. Here's what the situation is.
Do people really have problems with their mother-in-law in this day and age? Is that still
I think first of all, I think a lot of people come to therapy with the sort of Sartre philosophy of, hell is other people. Help me manage these other people in my life. And I think that, yes, the world is filled with difficult people. We all know them. A lot of them share our last name. Nobody goes through life and doesn't meet difficult people. But sometimes hell is us. Sometimes we are the cause of our difficulty. And sometimes, I think that we all have blind spots. And there are ways that we shoot ourselves in the foot over and over and over and end up in the same place repeatedly. And that's when we have to say, you need to see something about what you're doing. It can't just be that all of these other people are problematic. They might be problematic, but how are you responding to them? And can you have more agency over the way that you respond? And can you make different choices so you're not stuck or trapped?
Yeah, my favorite character besides you in the book is the guy who just keeps bellowing idiot at everything. And it just cracks me up every time. And everyone is doing something wrong. And he's just trapped in that mind frame.
Yeah.
And then he has a secret that he he's really hiding from you.
Right, because it's too painful for him to face. And this is a person who's very successful in life, and from the outside, he's a very high achieving person. But he has a lot of trouble interpersonally because he thinks that everybody else is an idiot and he knows better. And sometimes he does, by the way. There is some truth to that. He's very bright. But there's also a way of going about and moving through the world that protects him. So he can keep everybody at bay. He can keep everybody at a distance. It's very hard for anybody to get close to him, including his wife and his children. And and there's something that there's a tragedy in his life that's revealed in the book. I don't know that at first.
How long does it take for you to know about it?
It's months. I've been seeing him for months, and there's this
Once
huge.
a week for months?
Yeah. He's very condescending to me. What people do in the therapy room is sort of a microcosm of what they do out in the world. So he can be very insulting, very abrasive. And he does that to people out in the world too.
He likens